and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Tran Mendez, and I am an academic trainer with the Center for Teaching and Learning. Today's session is called Minority Stress and Intersectionality in the LGBTQIA plus community. And today's presenters are Dr. Judith Cannon and Kyle Lucas, one of our MFT students. And just a couple of housekeeping items before I turn it over to my two presenters. I am currently recording today's session. It will be posted in the comments later on today. And remember, for all of our attendees here today, if you stay the entire session, 2 of you will win an NCU Pride t-shirt. And so stay the entire time to be eligible. And we are saving questions to the very end, but feel free to use the Q&A box to type your questions in as we go. At the very end, Judy and Kyle will answer your questions. And with that, I will turn it over to our two presenters.
Good morning. I am Kyle Lucas. My pronouns are he, him, his. And I am an MA MFT student at NCU. And as part of our introductions, Judy and I really wanted to kind of engage in some of our self-disclosures about the different facets of our identities that ties into the topics that we're talking about today. So I'm 36. I am a cisgender, identify as gay, queer, white, male, able-bodied, middle class. I'm in a biracial and binational marriage of 6 years. And my cisgender husband is an immigrant from Mexico. My spirituality is kind of informed by Buddhist philosophy. And I grew up in rural Southeast Washington, but I've been living in California for the last 15 years.
Thank you, Kyle. I'm Dr. Judith Cannon. I'm a faculty member here at NCU in Marriage and Family Sciences. I am a 72-year-old white, queer, cisgendered female. I am able-bodied, middle class, and spiritual, not religious. I grew up in the South and now live in California. I have 2 grown children and 2 grandchildren, all of whom were born and raised in heterosexual families. My non-binary partner and I have been together for 22 years and have a 17-year-old gay daughter. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Next slide, Kyle. This is Pride Month, and we have a lot to celebrate, from the Stonewall riots of 1969 to yesterday's Supreme Court ruling. We are on a long path towards safety, freedom, and equality. Black, Indigenous, and all people of color are fighting for their lives on our streets today. We must fight beside them. As Dr. Martin Luther King said, no one is free until we are all free. Oppression kills in overt and covert ways. The minority stress model was developed by Meyer in 2003 to explain a higher prevalence of mental health disorders among lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. Minority stress refers to that additional stress that members of marginalized groups are subjected to as a result of prejudice and discrimination they suffer. The experience of minority stress can lead to poorer health outcomes compared to those who do not experience it. This stress is further complicated for those with multiple intersecting minority identities. Kyle will be discussing intersectionality in a few minutes to cover this topic more. Minority stress is unique, chronic, and socially based. It is unique because not everyone experiences it. It is the stress that is added to the stress experienced by everyone. The Supreme Court yesterday said it is illegal to fire us for who we are. This is awesome. However, laws do not end prejudice and discrimination. They do give us legal recourse. As an example of how minority stress is added to regular stress, imagine starting a new job. This is stressful for everyone. If you're lesbian or gay, you experience the additional stress of wondering how people will respond when they learn about your same-sex partner. Minority stress is chronic because society discriminates 24/7, 365 throughout our lives. Minority stress is socially based because it stems from social processes, institutions, and structures. All of us experience stress going to a doctor. A transgender woman must also worry about being misgendered, mistreated, or even having a doctor refuse to treat her. Minority stress creates increased risk for adverse physical and emotional outcomes. Minorities experience higher rates of cardiovascular disease, asthma, diabetes, immune disorders, and some cancers. Minorities also experience higher rates of substance abuse, suicide attempts, depression, and anxiety. Minority stress, like all stress, can negatively affect one's ability to adapt to and cope with difficulties. This is especially relevant for our community as our country and world are currently facing multiple intersecting crises. Kyle will be discussing the current context and current events later in the presentation. Next slide. Meyer discussed the sources of minority stress as ranging from distal to proximal, from external to internal. External minority stress ranges from microaggressions to murder. External stress includes prejudice, stigma, discrimination, bullying, marginalization, violence, victimization, medical discrimination, economic discrimination, housing discrimination, misgendering, so much more. The list is endless. External stress comes from family, peers, school, employers, religious groups, law enforcement, medical institutions, and so on. External stress also comes from what is missing: positive images, role models, celebrations, guidance, and support. Next slide. Internal stress is what we experience inside because of those external stressful experiences. When we grow up with society's negative attitudes, images, and words regarding who we are, we take those in and often believe they are true, leading to devaluing ourselves and to great internal conflict. We internalize homophobia, biphobia, transphobia. In the beginning, many of us try to hide who we are. We don't want to acknowledge to ourselves or to others who we are. Hiding means a constant monitoring of our behavior, limiting our friendships, our interests. Hiding results in isolation, which results in further stress. Hiding also leads to a delayed development of a positive identity, a positive sense of who we are. Hiding can lead to shame and even suicide. Hiding also disconnects us from the communities that can support us and help us heal and grow. Coming out is associated with better health outcomes. However, coming out is a lifelong process with its own stressors. We meet new people all the time and must decide if, when, and how to tell them who we are. Because of prejudice, we often expect and receive judgment and rejection. Hiding or out, we are constantly assessing risk. Even with this, all of this, we are strong and thriving. Later in the presentation, I will discuss minority resilience and what we and others can do to make changes. Now, Kyle is going to address the impact of having multiple minority identities.
So intersectionality is really a theoretical framework that we use for understanding, analyzing, examining how the facets of our identity have effects on their personal, from the personal, societal, and systemic levels. And it recognizes how the facets of our identity is affected by others and vice versa. So intersectionality has its roots in Black feminism through scholars such as Crenshaw, Collins, and Lord. And they began by looking at the interplay of racism, sexism, classism, etc., in the lives of Black women, and how, as a Black woman in the United States, you are not just affected by being a woman, you are also affected by being Black. If you are of a certain socioeconomic status, you are also affected by that. And all of those stressors in your life that relate to those different facets of your identity have impacts on your life, and that it's not it's not enough to just examine the gender of an individual or the socioeconomic status of an individual, that you have to expand the viewpoint and look at all of the facets of their identities and which oppressive identities are inherent and which marginalized identities are inherent. And we can see that within the LGBTQ community as well. So there's also some additional lenses that work with, play with the intersectionality and minority distress models that we can also examine. One of them is queer theory. Queer theory was kind of really based off of the philosophical writings of Michel Foucault. Judith Butler is one of the pioneers of queer theory. And it's a social theory that aims to decentralize and eliminate the middle or the norm. So instead of concepts and constructions being based in a continuum or a straight line where there's a, quote, normal in the middle, and the farther you go from it at either end of that continuum from the normal, it is judged by its distance in relation to that normal in the center. Queer theory employs a concept that's called queering, which seeks to blow that up in a sense. And that it's a radical and decentralized viewpoint that says there is no normal. So it's a point of view that can be used with the concepts of intersectionality and minority stress model. Additionally, liberation psychology, pioneered by Ignacio Martín Baró and Frantz Fanon, it looks at the psychopathology of colonization and aims to decolonize marginalized groups and individuals. So Baró focused on mental health specifically, creating the concept of concientización or critical consciousness. So this is really a way of assisting with clients in creating a critical awareness, a critical consciousness of oppression related to different facets of their intersectional identity and the interplays of that oppression with their mental health. As Judy talked about earlier, the minority stress model emphasizes that there are health effects to minority stress. This is what Baró is also talking about, and how the effects of that systemic oppression can have effects on mental health. Another lens we can use is Black psychology. Joseph White is one of the scholars instrumental in that. And one of the main focuses of Black psychology is the deconstruction of the Eurocentric nature of psychology. So much of the history of psychology is rooted in European and Euro-American cultural viewpoints. So Black psychology seeks to move the locus of focus on a psychology rooted in African and Black liberation. And W.B. Du Bois notes this concept of double consciousness, which describes the way of which African Americans navigate two separate worlds between their Black and African identity and their identities within American society. So again, you can kind of see how these are all similar and related lenses that tie back into intersectionality and in the minority stress model. And an extension really of liberation psychology is what's called ethnopolitical psychology. And the goal of ethnopolitical psychology is to really take the liberation psychology notion of critical consciousness and operationalize it through sociopolitical action, through social change. We're seeing that play out, every day, especially right now in this time that we're in. That's an operationalized operationalization of critical consciousness. So when we're talking about all of these issues with minority stress, intersectionality, the additional lenses, all of these things have real world effects and real current contexts that affect not just, American society as a whole, but particularly the LGBTQIA plus community. And one of those is COVID-19 and health disparities. So as Judy mentioned earlier, minority stress model and intersectionality both highlight how there are health disparities for LGBTQIA plus individuals. And those disparities can be a result of their race or ethnicity and or their sexual minority status, and if they are a trans person. All of these issues can also lead to avoidance of care. A transgender person may avoid seeing a doctor for fear that they will be discriminated against. And issues of racism, heterosexism, cissexist oppression are all factors that tie into the ways and the means and the frequency in which LGBTQIA plus individuals access healthcare. We also see that in relation to racial and ethnic minorities. With COVID-19 specifically, 34% of cases, confirmed cases in the United States, are in the African American community, despite only being 13% of the total population. And we see similar statistics for the Latinx community, and the Latinx community has made up a staggering 80% of ICU admissions in the United States. These pre-existing inequalities that Judy talked about and highlighted earlier, of the increases in instances of physical and mental health, create the conditions in which COVID-19 has allowed itself to just wipe its way through Black and Brown communities by exploiting those vulnerabilities already present within the system. There is also the added issue of insurance access. So when you have marginalized communities and you have the intersectional identities of queer people, Black and Brown people, and low socioeconomic status, that has direct effects on folks' access to insurance. And in our country, insurance is the main model in which we access healthcare. So if you are a person that has limited or no resources to access healthcare, that also leads towards negative health outcomes. So in terms of greater kind of bring this out a little bit to politics and society in general, there are a lot of structural stigmas that are built into our society, whether it's white supremacy, heterosexism, cissexism, all of these kind of meta oppressive narratives that are built into the structural nature of our society. And they create collective traumas. Collective traumas can be thought of in the Black community, the collective trauma of 401 years of slavery, oppression, murder. It goes on and on. With the Indigenous community, the long history of genocide, cultural erasure, loss of their native languages, all of these things, including adverse health effects for that community as well. It also is present with the LGBTQIA plus community. Heterosexism and cissexism has created an environment for queer people in our society and in our politics that it weaponizes these structural stigmas to create collective traumas for the individual and the group. And also within the LGBTQIA plus community as a whole, we also have internalized racism and cissexism within our community. There are many incidences of Black, Indigenous, and people of color within the LGBTQIA plus community experiencing racism and discrimination, whether it is from being at a bar, or representation in media, or representation at pride parades and celebrations, to the all too common and ugly listings of preferences on online dating profiles that excludes people of color. That is another enactment of these structural stigmas. And another issue that our community particularly deals with, that's a sub-issue of a greater issue, is queer immigration. Issues of nativism, which is a structural stigma that is built into our society that gives preference to those born physically within our country, leads to systems of oppression for people who are seeking refuge, asylum, or simply a better life. And the evolution of our immigration system has led to be called what some scholars refer to as crimmigration, a criminalization of the immigration process, that the routes and the opportunities for obtaining legal status in migrating to the United States are restricted. And any ways outside of that, that context are criminalized. And unfortunately, in this day and age, with children still locked in cages, we have seen the criminalization of the asylum process, which is protected under US and international law, but the structural stigma has grown stronger in recent times, to the detriment, both physically and mentally, to the queer immigrant community, as we see horrifying examples of treatment and killings of LGBTQIA plus community members while in custody. Another major aspect of intersectional and minority stress within current contexts is the economic crisis that we are currently in and economic instability in general that is ongoing. So because of the structural stigmas and the institutionalized and systemic nature of racism and heterosexism and cissexism, there are very real economic disparities for minority communities. And they also lead to issues of safety and physical insecurity and housing insecurity, economic vulnerability of the transgender community particularly, and racial disparities have outsized effects on housing security for members of the LGBTQIA plus community. And when you are not sure of where you are going to be sleeping tonight, that is an issue that has very, very large consequences on your mental health and your physical health. And then we have racial unrest and violence. So we kind of touched on racism within the LGBTQIA plus community, which is something that our community needs to continue and do better at addressing and head on and dealing with and negotiating to resolve. But there's also issues of solidarity. We also need to, as a community, bind together. We need to stand up for our trans brothers and sisters when they are being murdered. And we need to stand up for all Black Lives Matter, Indigenous lives, and Latinx communities as well. Violence is something, again, Judy touched on it earlier in the minority stress model, that is a very real fear for members of our community. And we are seeing that play out, especially in issues related to Black and brown trans women. The threat of violence is very real for them, and that has very real consequences in their daily lives, their economic stability, and their health stability. And these collective traumas that communities of marginalization have experienced over the years and the centuries, along with the crimmigration, all leads into this feeling of unrest, this fighting against the systemic nature of these collective traumas and the structural stigmas that are oppressive and have such negative and profound consequences on marginalized communities. We've heard many times people express over the last few weeks, I am tired. And that is something I think that that all marginalized communities can connect to. And while our community was celebrating a great victory yesterday that may help with the goal of eliminating some of the economic stability issues within our community, We still have a very long way to go, and so do our brother and sister communities in other facets as well. And now Judy's going to take it back over and talk about resilience and allies.
Thank you, Kyle. I want to talk about minority resilience at an individual level, at the community level, and where the role of our allies. The president is taking back protections that keep our communities safe. Police are killing Black people. And even in this and the multiple contexts that Kyle talked about, we are strong. We are resilient. We deal with this stress, both chronic and acute, and we thrive. Resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. Resilience is the ability to survive and even thrive in the face of adversity. Resilience buffers against the negative impact of stress on our health. Individual resilience consists of the qualities a person may possess. There appears to be some genetic components for resilience. Our early experiences also seem to affect resilience. Resilience is reflected in qualities such as personal agency, that sense of power an individual has in their own life. With resilience, we see optimism, hopefulness, effectiveness, the ability to regulate emotions, and the ability to see failure as a form of positive feedback. Kyle, you want to go to our next slide? I thought we had kind of gone ahead to that. So the minority resilience, there we go. These are all incredibly positive traits, and they do help us thrive. However, the expectation of, however, the expectation of this individual resilience can have its negative impacts. Think of the young child whose parents expect him to just get tough in the face of bullying. The expectation of individual resilience is rooted in the American ideology of meritocracy and rugged individualism, that sort of exalting that personal triumph over adversity. This ideology this ideology can lead to negative health impacts in disadvantaged populations. Not everyone has the same opportunity to develop resilience when the underlying social structures are unequal. Racism, homophobia, sexism, cissexism, social inequality, and other social disadvantages limit individual resilience. The focus on individual resilience can also lead to the blame the victim mentality. By noting that individuals can be resilient, we risk expecting that individuals ought to be resilient. While it is great that some individuals are resilient, focusing on individual resilience also removes or reduces that social responsibility to create the public policy that protects disadvantaged populations. Focusing on individual resilience, we are also attending to the individual's response to stress rather than the need to eliminate the stressors. If you are not doing well with the stress of these times, I hope you will be patient with yourself. I hope you will have compassion for yourself. As Kyle said, we are tired. We are tired with dealing with all of the stress that existed before our current crises, added to all of the current crises. Let's move to the next slide. Understanding community resilience can balance this focus on individual expectations. Community resilience focuses on how communities can expand the capacity of an individual to develop and sustain well-being. Communities can reduce minority stress and the negative health impacts in several ways. Being in community with people who share our identity and experiences provides social and emotional support. This might be the LGBTQIA plus community as a whole or specific subgroups within the community. It may be local, it may be national community. In community, we are not alone. We belong. We are seen and valued. Being in a like-minded and supportive community can help us redefine our values and norms and develop our pride in our community. Community provides that sense of belonging, a family of choice. In community, there are community centers, specialized centers, support groups, hotlines, information, role models, and so much more. As Kyle mentioned earlier, communities can also support the development of critical consciousness. Critical consciousness is the process by which marginalized and oppressed people learn to think critically about inequitable social conditions. Critical consciousness helps people take action to change the inequities. We must learn to question how and why power relationships are structured and maintained. As we develop critical consciousness, we are prepared to engage in social action and activism and work together to advocate for affirmative laws and policies. This very activism increases our sense of well-being and empowerment and reduces the effects of minority stress. Allies are a huge part of our resilience. An ally is someone who both privately and publicly supports LGBTQIA plus people and equality in all forms. Connectedness to and support from family, friends, religious organizations, and communities mitigate minority and intersectional stress and the negative health impacts. We all know that parents who accept and support their LGBTQIA plus children greatly reduce suicide rates. And we love those allies who show up at Pride events to give hugs to the many who do not have family support. We talked about how LGBTQIA plus community can support its members in developing critical consciousness. Allies can help here too. Educate yourself and others about inequities and the impact they have on LGBTQIA plus people. Model and teach critical consciousness and a questioning of the power structure. As you model and teach critical consciousness, you increase the possibility that LGBTQIA plus youth and adults will have support from their family, friends, schools, churches, religious organizations, and communities. Advocate for fair laws and equal treatment in our community and all disadvantaged communities. We ask those of you who are allies to speak, to act, and to vote. Thank you all for joining us today. Let's open it up to any questions or comments. I also want to say that we will be continuing this discussion at the LGBTQIA plus Commons group chat on Sunday afternoon. For more information, go to the LGBTQIA plus Commons group. We hope you'll join us. And let's see. So I'm looking at the questions now. Please put your questions in the Q&A box. Vic is reminding us that the Supreme Court ruling is for companies with more than 50 employees, which is only about 20 to 30% of the employers in the US. He asks, is it still important to support local efforts and the national effort at non-discrimination policy and or local discrimination? Absolutely. The work is not anywhere close to done for any of our minority communities. It was a huge victory. I don't want to undermine it, but yes, it does not cover most of the population. And as I said earlier, it still doesn't take away the prejudice. It just gives us legal recourse. And so yes, the work is ongoing. So Shirley says, resilience is indeed important and wonderful. However, as a society, we cannot keep counting on minority resilience. That is absolutely true. That's what we're saying in terms of the importance of our allies and the importance of us as allies to other minority groups. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about that, Kyle?
No, I totally agree. And that is the importance of allies, is, that ties into we're tired, that we hear from lots of marginalized communities. And it also reminds me too of the fact that white privilege is not a problem for Black and Brown communities. It is a white community problem. It is our job to address it and to break down the power structures of white privilege. So I completely agree that, yeah, it's, as minority communities, it's important for us to be standing up for ourselves, but community makes it work, and we need our allies.
Thanks. I'm going to read Lavon's comment. In your research, what are some of the solutions that you have found to this problem? Back in the day, we had peaceful marches and boycotts. Today, we have Pride Day. But what more can be done? What other ideas are there to help our communities be more accepted within the systemic policy of denial of people's differences? I'm just curious if your research, you saw anything that successfully leads to change in our communities. I guess it's addressed to both of us. Kyle, you want to start?
Sure, yeah. So it kind of ties into what Judy was talking about with allies and the learn, act, vote, and that it's important for us to remain connected and part of our society. Like Harvey Milk said, come out wherever you are. The more visible we are, and the more that the issues that we need addressed, whether it's in the LGBTQIA plus community or us as allies with other marginalized communities, the act of operationalizing the critical consciousness that ethnopolitical psychology talks about is part of the solution. It's that never giving up, that unrelenting push forward. And the more they know us, the less they can hate us.
I absolutely agree with that. Been around a long time, and I can remember when it was a very common comment for people to say, I don't know any lesbian or gay people. And that was never true, but we were much more hidden. I think that's much less true now, and I appreciate that. And I do think it's that way that we learn to speak up, whether in groups small or large, that is really a part of that. And I think as a community, we have to keep acting. It's like there's that sense so much has been accomplished, but we can't stop. We can rest. We can shift our focus. Right now, I focus in Black Lives Matter. Feels very crucial to me. That's our focus now. We have to keep working at all levels, as was stated earlier. So at your local level, what can you do? Do you have opportunities to speak? Do you have opportunities to be out at your kids' parent-teacher organization that make that invisible? Can you help with the gay-straight alliances in the schools? That each of us, I think, need to look for our callings in addressing these issues, at what level we want to work and what arenas that we are willing, not just, I wanted to say, are comfortable in. This is really not a time to stay in our comfort zone. This is a time to get out of our comfort zone, to do the things that scare us, in support of our community, as well as the communities for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Let's see. So that was Lavon. And Lavon and others, ask follow-up questions if you want to. Let's see. So Nelson asks, how do we go about powerfully dismantling these social structures that Kyle addressed? And how do we do that on an individual level? Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, I think that kind of ties into what we were just talking about, in that it is important in dismantling the structural stigmas is to identify where their power comes from. and to work towards dismantling that power base. You know, for example, white privilege. The white privilege is housed within the white community, so it is the white community's responsibility to work towards dismantling that.
Yeah.
And that is both a structural and societal and an individual endeavor. You know, we can't dismantle the oppressive nature of white privilege without people individually dismantling it within themselves. So, you know, it kind of goes into, I think, the whole relational context of marriage and family therapy in general is that everything is relational. And all of these things need to be attacked on the internal, on the personal, and in the societal.
Absolutely, and thank you for kind of bringing us back to that. We do have to confront our internalized racism, our internalized sexism, our internalized heterosexism, cissexism. We have to continue to confront that. And maybe hardest of all is that middle level family. You know, it's sort of like we can work on ourselves, we can work at a political level for activism, and many of us live in families, close and extended, that have a great deal of racism, sexism, heterosexism in them. And finding our voice is part of, I think, our own empowerment and our political work within our families.
I agree. I think that that's the hardest. From the personal perspective, that is often the hardest level of the of structures to address.
So Vic also asks, what are your feelings on the terms sexual and gender diverse versus LGBTQIA plus? Naming ourselves is very complicated. I use both, and how I identify myself shifts sometimes based on the context that I'm in. I do think it's very important that we get to name ourselves. And again, at all levels, that I get to call myself queer, if that's what I want to call myself. If in another context I identify as lesbian, that's fine too. I get to name myself. I think another important place this shows up for me is that we use how people call themselves. So that if someone wants to identify as queer, that's how I respond to them. And absolutely at the pronoun level, I think it's important for me as an ally of the transgender community to share my pronouns. So that's not something unique to the transgender community, that we make that a norm as part of ending some of that.
And that ties into dismantling the structural stigma of the cissexism, is normalizing and queering the normal.
Yes, yes. Yes, we're here and we're queer.
Yep.
Yes.
Judy, I'll take the next two if you don't mind.
Okay, great.
Melody, yes, you can share this webinar to your social media. I am currently recording today's session. I will have it posted in the CTL webinar library, but I will also send it directly to the LGBTQIA community in the comments as well. Feel free to grab that YouTube link and share it with whoever you may like. So yes, you'll have a recording, and yes, you can share.
Thank you, Tran. Bucky says, I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you, and I appreciate your time and research and presentation. I'm going to graduate with my PhD in a few weeks. Congratulations. My theoretical framework was based on Myers' minority stress theory. It was great to hear from you. And Bucky, thank you for your research. For those of you who are students, I think that's another area of activism that your research, your papers state that you take opportunities to present in webinars. This is Kyle's, I think, second webinar or more on diversity. We welcome student presentations. They can include faculty or not include faculty. So that's a level of activism at our school level that's there. So thank you for your research, and I hope you get it out there and it makes a difference also. Jason asks, how do you reconcile when people like J.K. Rowling says she is a supporter of the trans community, yet also supports a group that is anti-trans by saying real women give birth? I think that allies, again, I think I said privately and publicly, as an ally, and I think that we're saying not just, what you say, but what you do. And some people demonstrate their allyship in what they say and what they do, and some people in what they say, and it contradicts what they do. I don't know if you had more to say about that, Kyle. So.
Yeah, and I guess it's not a reconciliation, but it's obvious that she has a lot of learning to do on what the real lived experiences of trans people, especially trans women, are. So obviously the comments that she made were harmful and hurtful to the trans community in many, many ways, and it perpetuates a structural stigma against, so she either needs to re-examine her allyship or her views. So that's a journey that she needs to go on.
Let's see. Joella sends her thanks. Natalie says, thank you for your very thoughtful and insightful presentation. What are some groups that allies can join to fight for equality? Well, I will start at the immediate front. We have an LGBTQIA plus group in the Commons. I welcome you joining there. I welcome you posting there. Welcome you as members and as well as allies to join us for our conversation next Sunday. And we do that once a month. I think PFLAG is another place for parents and friends of lesbian and gays. It's a good place. And again, I want us to keep our focus on intersectionality. So I think that we also look at groups that we can join, that we as queer people can join to ally in other fights. And I don't know, maybe you have more of a list of groups. I can also say, and my 17-year-old keeps me very busy on this. I don't know how powerful petitions are, but my daughter sends me multiple ones every day. That's part of her current activism. So I think, again, we just look for those chances. Kyle?
There's also a great group called Showing Up for Racial Justice, acronym SURGE, that is really geared towards allies of the Black community and engaging allies in activism and showing up. So, and like Judy was saying, as queer allies, with the Black community as a whole, I agree it is important that we also participate in intersectional opportunities and to support all marginalized communities across the board. And there's also some great groups like Raíces, based out of Texas, that deals with immigration issues. And there is a wonderful organization called Familia. It's a trans queer liberation movement that seeks to advance, empower, and liberate trans and queer Latinx and migrant communities as well.
And the number is large, and it's sort of like depending on your social media. I think there are places that you can find and follow groups and decide on your level of participation in them. Mitch says, I appreciate the nod to the great Supreme Court victory. However, it does not take away the stripping of rights for equality in healthcare and the institutionalizing the systemic discrimination for trans and non-binary healthcare. Amen. Yep. It's like, again, it's a step forward. It's a little pinhole of light in very much. I mean, our president is actively taking away trans rights. And the work does not stop. It does not slow, but we do want to take a minute and celebrate the tiny.
Exactly.
Did you want to say more about the trans or non-binary healthcare stuff, Kyle?
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is perfect. Is, besides the already pre-existing institutional and social issues relating to access to care for trans and non-binary folks, and also the avoidance of care in some instances to avoid being discriminated and marginalized. Yeah, there are very real in political terms and actual life terms threats to the health security and health access security of trans and non-binary folks. So that is, again, like you said, we can't stop. It's the ideal is to kind of build this revolving wheel of activists that can, take turns in being at the forefront. And because we also have to, as we're fighting for equality, we have to ensure that we're taking care of our own mental health and our own physical health. So we need a robust field and community of activists and allies to keep pushing forward for our community and for other communities that are marginalized as well.
And I would come back to what I hope you will take away from this in all these arenas: educate yourself, learn more about it, speak up, act up, vote, put politicians at a local and national level in that support healthcare and equality for trans and non-binary people. I'll take a second to speak to therapists, marriage and family therapists in particular. I think there is a lack of education in our community about trans and non-binary mental health care and the ability to provide appropriate services for trans and non-binary individuals in the area of mental health. We need to educate ourselves. We need to be aware of referral sources where they can get further care, and we can continue to educate ourselves. So.
Mm-hmm. And acknowledging and being sensitive to the Eurocentric, heterosexist, inherent biases in a lot of the models, and work to actively dismantle or work around those. And I think that kind of leads into Shamayara's question coming up next.
You want to read it, Kyle? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Shamayara, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I am currently doing my literature review on the lack of therapy and treatment models available to assist therapists who work with African-American lesbians in relation to relationship formation and education. Do any of you have any therapy models that are helpful in treating Black and I believe it's Latino lesbians? Kind of like what I was just talking about. I would definitely within the postmodern subset of models. Me personally, I am drawn to narrative therapy, but also the combination of liberation psychology and narrative therapy and queer theory, kind of a hybridization of those, kind of using the philosophy of all those and the very real narrative emphasis on dominant discourses, both internally and externally, and externalizing the quote problem and stuff. So that's I guess my thoughts is I think that narrative out of all of the kind of traditional and postmodern models does the best at addressing diversity issues, but there's always room for growth, and I'd love to see a liberation narrative family therapy model come that takes that work even farther.
Absolutely. And I'd love to say more, but I'm watching our box stack up, so I'm going to try to get to as many of these as we can. Georgette says, I'm an ally trying to gain knowledge and advocacy and tools to support my friends and my 16-year-old daughter. Tools for all forms of unfair treatment for all humans. Thank you, Georgette. She says kindness matters. Kindness does matter. And please do, and kindness to self and kindness to others. And Shirley says, part of what we can do as allies is talk it in everyday language. Yes, this needs to be part of our ongoing conversation. It does not need to be ignored. We need to be willing to bring it up. We need to be willing to take risks. I, as someone with white privilege, need to take the risk in bringing up conversations about Black Lives Matter and other racial issues and deal with my fumbling and take responsibility for it in small and large groups. Mitch says allies can also vote with their money. Amen. Often with disparities in economic legacy wealth, we need the white supremacy wealth to move issues forward, supporting by people of color, trans, non-binary, and businesses and chambers of commerce. Again, and I will also say again, like listen to the young people too. My daughter has now limited us to minority business restaurants while we're getting through this sort of thing. We are trying to vote with our money and support minority businesses right now. So.
Amen.
Yes.
Is there
Okay.
a country to look at and say, quote, they get it right? Or are we blazing new trails? If so, is it realistic to think we'll see these changes in our generation, or is this to build a better future for the next generation?
Yes.
My personal opinion is as far as the country that gets it right, I don't think there's any country in the world that gets this issue or anything for that matter 100% right. I think the best approach is to look at the approaches that other countries have taken and steps that have been enacted and use the best that's out there in the world. You know, there are many negative effects to a globalized world, but there are some positive silver linings, which is the sharing of knowledge. And if we can see how other communities and other countries are doing things differently, that might help us give us ideas. And absolutely, no one's under any illusions that all of these structural stigmas were not built overnight. They're not going to be demolished overnight. So that's just the reality, but we have no choice but to continue in the fight to dismantle them. And it's to improve. I mean, you know, I'm 36, almost 37. I had to remember for a second there. When I was born, you know, in the early 80s, like ACT UP, you know, the movement and stuff, the community was fighting for its life, you know, and for even just funding and research and paying attention to what was going on with the AIDS and HIV crisis. And then you fast forward 36 years in my lifetime, and I'm married, and you keep see all of these advancements. So it's even the small incremental changes can have effects. You know, I saw something yesterday that was talking about how the ruling yesterday does not just simply have effects within the United States, that courts in other countries do look to rulings and precedents set by other countries when making rulings and decisions within their own country. So this ruling by the Supreme Court yesterday will have worldwide effects in many ways.
Tran, I'm aware of our time. There's some other great questions in the box. Will Kyle and I have access to those questions as a starting place for Sunday's chat?
Yes. What I can do is I can export you a list of all of the questions that were asked. If you can just take note of where you leave off, then you'll be able to pick up where you left off.
Thank you. So, and again, as we're wrapping up, I would invite you to join us on Sunday, to join our Commons group, and to join us on Sunday. So thank you for attending today. Thank you for your openness. That's a huge first step. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for attending, everyone.
Thank you both for being here. I thought your presentation was amazing. I learned a lot. I know everybody here learned a lot. They love sharing. So I will get the questions over to you. And to everybody that was in attendance today, please join the group. Please check out the recording. Please share it. And then let's continue the conversation in the comments or in the chat on Sunday, is it, Judy?
Yep, Sunday.
On Sunday.
This Sunday at 3 p.m. Pacific.
Perfect.
Is the Zoom link is on the Commons, and I usually post a reminder posting on the Commons about the group chats, and Judy usually sends, if you join the group, when Judy sends out the email reminder, you'll get the email reminder as well.
And then I will take it a step further. When I post the recording later on today or tomorrow, I will grab all that information and I will have it all in one place for everybody. And I hope to see everybody there on Sunday. But with that, I do have to end today's session. Thank you all so much for being here. We have one more session for Pride Month. It has been rescheduled to Saturday, June 27th due to scheduling conflicts. It is at 1 o'clock Pacific time. So it'll just be on Saturday instead of Friday at the same time. And that is with Gary Walker, one of our alumnus. So everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again for being here and see you at the next webinar. Bye-bye.
Bye.